Holocaust because anti-Semitism is still a problem? I really want you to answer that because that's exactly what you pretty much said in your article, that a black person can move here because anti-blacks is still in America, so they deserve reparations that's due to freemen. Would you say that same thing to a Jewish person who moves to Germany, doesn't have any ties to the Holocaust, but because they're Jewish and because anti-Semitism exists, they deserve reparations as well? If you could answer that as well, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Um, so yeah, I'll answer that real quick. So, uh, well, first of all, I think it's problematic to compare the reparations case to the Holocaust case and the Japanese internment case, because in both uh, cases, it would be argued that America is paying reparations for something it did, and which is my point. So my position has never been that like every black person in America deserves reparations. Like if you just
That's
black
what
and you
you said
showed
in
up
your
like two
article,
weeks
though.
ago,
I'm sorry. That's what you
no,
said in your article.
uh, that is not what I said in my article. But my point has always been that the when we're talking about the specific case for reparations, and this is something I've written about for years, is that like one of the positions that I hold is that like that it should go back, it should be generational, right? So I agree with Marcel that like if you just showed up in 1970 or in 1980 or 19 even 1960, then you might not you should not you're not due reparations or the same reparations as a person who is a descendant of slaves. But my point, my ultimate point is that if we're talking about the vestiges of slavery, again, a person who immigrated here in 1918 or in 1937, right? They've suffered the vest, and I'm not arguing that the suffering is equal or that the payment should be equal, but they suffered from the vestiges of slavery and this arbitrary cutoff date, as if there is a pot and and that we're just going to split this one pot when if we're going to get into the economic data, this black people are the only people who even consider letting America off the hook that way, right? Like if we talk about Social Security, they don't say like, here's how much we're gonna spend on Social Security. Now y'all split it up. They don't say that about white farmer aid. They don't say it about Medicaid. They don't say it about Medicare. This is the only argument that point even comes up. They say this is the harm that we've done, or this is the thing that we should pay per person, or this is what these people deserve, and then we'll figure it out from there. And however much that comes to is what we'll pay. And it may send America into debt, as Social Security did, as Medicare did, as Medicaid does, right? And if you're talking about, the Jewish people, and if you want me to answer that question, what I would say is that there were people who were in internment camps that were not Jewish that got reparations, right? Because they are paying for a thing that they did. And when we think of the Holocaust, we specifically attribute it to Jewish people, but all of the reparations that they pay are for a thing that Germany did. All of the reparations that America pays to people who were in internment camps are for a thing that America did. So what we are saying here is, and we know you did this thing to black people, but some of the black people who you did the thing to, that you were doing the exact same thing, not as long, but the exact same thing after they got here and after their children got here and after their grandchildren and their great grandchildren got here. But they're not descendants of slaves, so we're going to let you off the hook for that when that same sentiment is the same weapon that you use against black people. And to let America off the hook like that is a strategy of division, because you know what those fourth and fifth generation black immigrants who've been here since the 1930s and the 40s, you know where they live? In the same redlined areas that black people live, right? Like the data shows that. The same suffering that a person whose great 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 grandfather came here in 1923 suffers is what the grandchild of freedmen. And I'm not saying that every single black person, I would never even argue that. It's like a moot point that every single black person in America should get reparations. But the
But
reparations
Michael, that's
should
what you
go
said. I
to
have it in the Jumbotron. That's what you
affording,
said.
the reparations should go to the people who are harmed by the institutions and the discrimination that was leveled against the people who suffered from those vestiges.
Michael, I'd like to
Okay.
address what Marcel was saying for a second here. So on page 13 of the PDF, anyway, of your article, you say, point number 2 on that page, there are better ways, such as, and then I'm going down about 4 bullets, and you say, just pay everybody black. You say, look, I know what I said about California's law, but you and I both know that this thing is going to end up in court anyway. And then you said you're not talking about, everybody being able to recite a particular lyric, but you did ask for, instead of using lineage, use a metric where the state could use the same individual information to create an algorithm that determines how much wealth was stolen from each participant. And so you did call for the payment of everybody black. And I don't know if that was more of a just, colloquial sort of thing, or if that was literal for you. And that's the challenge that Marcel is presenting. And then if you can put a pin in that, if you listen to the conversation that was happening during AB 3121, and I mention it because it's the most robust so far, the most robust dialogue about reparations that we've seen publicly, when they had Chair Chemerinsky, a constitutional law scholar, come on and explain this multiple times. They talked about the idea of how using race as the hook would weaken the laws and the plan's ability to withstand constitutional challenge. So when you say pay everybody black, and when you talk about this metric, how do you envision what you are discussing and what others are discussing in this race-based all people black perspective? How does that withstand the challenge of what has been laid out from the law? And doesn't it weaken the possibility of reparations for descendants of slaves, the people who have truly borne the burden all of these years and who make up the vast majority of Black America? Doesn't that essentially weaken the effort for them trying to make it so broad that it covers everybody?
May
Well,
I?
so go ahead.
Hey, I want to say, Michael, okay, there's 2 things you said that are really interesting. You said that we'll be divisive and we'll pretty much have like a hierarchy among ourselves if we have reparations. You didn't use the hierarchy was an exact word, but what you're proposing is just as bad. You're saying if we do what you're saying, do like a tier system, or you've been here this long, you've been here that long, how would that not cause division? That would be even more divisive. That will cause division within a family. My family has been here, like yours, because you're Gullah Geechee, probably since the 1700s, probably since the 1600s. We will not. So what? My mother will get more because she's been here longer. That's the problem with doing this generation thing. No, it doesn't go by generations. Also, Michael, check this out. There were Japanese who were interns that did not get paid reparations by the U.S. because the U.S. said they're not our responsibility. Those people are from Peru. What you're saying is the same thing that the U.S. will say to us if we try to include all Black people, people from Jamaica, people from Cuba. And I also want to bring out a point that we need to say. You keep saying the 30s and 40s. In the census from the 50s, the 60s, and going back, the percentage of Black people who were from other countries was to the right of the decimal. But it was hardly any, probably single digit, maybe double digit. There were hardly any Black immigrants. Even right now, as we speak, 90% of the Black American population are freedmen. We are non-immigrant background. So even now, as we speak, the lineage of most Black people in this country are Black Americans. It's very easy to identify us because we make up the majority. I also want to say in your article, you sort of contradicted yourself. You said that race is something that white people make up. So why would you want to make our claim then based on something that white people make up, knowing that they made it up, they can do whatever they want to do with it? Race might be a social construct that people can argue whether if it's real or not. I tend to feel that social constructs have real impacts on the world because technically a dollar bill only has value because we believe it does. That's a social construct. But to your point, though, if race is something that white people made up and it can be manipulated, let's go with something that can't be manipulated, something that cannot be denied, and that is lineage. It is a fact that chattel slavery happened in this nation for 260 years. Technically, they really found ways to perpetuate it through sharecropping, debtors' prisons, vagrancy laws. It is a fact that there were over 50 black Wall Streets, prosperous cities and towns that were destroyed by anti-black mob violence, either burnt to the ground or flooded. It is a fact that the FHA formed in the 1920s to put railroads and highways through black neighborhoods, and they did that up until the 60s. It is a fact that black Americans have had 14 million acres of the 15 million we amassed stolen from us. And one of the reasons why it was stolen was through heirs property, which the USDA anti-black discrimination. These things all took place again between 1776 and 1965 when there were almost no black immigrants here. How is it that we're here for centuries and a person can move here tomorrow and you say, oh, because America is an anti-black nation, they need to go ahead and give them a check too? Reparations is not to solve anti-blackness, Michael. Reparations is to pay the debt that this country still has not paid to the same people who were on those plantations at the end of the Civil War during emancipation. The people who built the infrastructure of this nation that, according to studies, still generates trillions from the port of Charleston, which is the ninth busiest port in America, to the port of Savannah here, which is the third busiest port. It's for the people who fought. And Abraham Lincoln said, if not for the Negro, this country would have lost the battle. Those were our ancestors. This country owes them. Now, what we look like, I go to you, you owe me $100, and my brother comes along and you say, well, because he's in my family too, I got to give him 100 too. Can't afford it. See you later. That would be the dumbest thing ever. You owe me 100. You don't owe my brother 100. So just because these black immigrants might be black like we are, that doesn't make them entitled to our debt. If you want to solve inequality in America, that is a separate matter. Reparations is not to solve inequality. Reparations is not to make white people like us. I don't care if they do or don't. Reparations is to pay the debt that this nation has yet to pay us from the time we were emancipated. We are their children, not the black immigrants coming here from Cuba or Colombia.
Michael, so there were some questions that were posed before, and feel free to answer that. But I'm curious to know, so there are a couple things that are happening, and I'm curious to know if you see American descendants of slaves or descendants of U.S. slavery as a unique and distinct people is one of the questions that listeners are having right now. Do you see them? Do you see freedmen as a unique and distinct people? Michael, are you muted? Am I in the matrix or is Michael?
We can hear you, Denise.
Okay.
Michael, are you with us?
I think I was in the matrix. I was on mute.
Okay.
So yes, I do see descendants of enslaved people in America as unique individuals. No question about it. And I think, to answer Marcel's question, all the statistics he rattled off are the same arguments that I make often, right? And I do not think that there is a question that most of the reparations are going to go to descendants of slaves because that's who's here in America. What I think this argument is evolved into just is what is the end point? And what I say is that, my position is not that if you, like Marcel said, if you got here yesterday and you're black, you should get reparations. I do not think that is feasible. I don't think that solves the question. My argument has never been like it's to make black people happy or make white people feel good about black people. But if we're talking about all of those cases and the legal strategy, I do think that, the law is not moral, right? So when you're talking about the case for reparations, you're talking about, first of all, from 1865, slavery was legal and constitutional, right? So in a court of law, America, like legally, America did nothing wrong. Like, that is the position of almost every legal scholar, right? So what you would have to show is what those effects of slavery were after slavery. And my position is that it weakens the argument just if you limit it to freedom, because again, a judge is going to say, well, it was constitutional, it was legal, and even though I think the general consensus is that it was wrong, right? Legally, what this country did was not against the law. But the Supreme Court has also said, hey, when you take those black people's tax money and gave it to white people, that was wrong. That's what Brown versus Board of Education said. That's what many of the rulings about the systemic institution of white supremacy has said, right? And so those arguments would have to be included in any legal argument, because that is the only precedent that we have. If we rely simply on the argument that slavery was wrong, the first argument will be from the opposition is that, oh, well, technically it was legal. And then the second argument would be, and those people were not American citizens.
Great.
Right?
So let me read, hold on for a second, Marcel. Let me read some of the information from AB 3121 so we can get clear on how it is connecting slavery and its lingering effects to your point, Michael. So let me read this. So it says that the institution of slavery is inextricably woven into the establishment, history, and prosperity of the United States, constitutionally and statutorily sanctioned from 1619 to 1865. Slavery deprived more than 4 million Africans and their descendants of life, liberty, citizenship, cultural heritage, and economic opportunity. Following the abolition of slavery, government entities at the federal, state, and local levels continue to perpetuate, condone, and often profit from practices that brutalized African Americans and excluded them from meaningful participation in society. This legacy of slavery and racial discrimination has resulted in debilitating economic, educational, and health hardships that are uniquely experienced by African Americans. The AB 3121 charges the Reparations Task Force with studying the institution of slavery and its lingering negative effects on living African Americans, including descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, and on society. So what this bill has been looking at is the lingering effect of slavery on the people, the descendants of the people who survived or experienced chattel slavery, specifically for reasons similar to what Marcel had said, which is the idea that the vast majority of African Americans were actually the descendants of slaves before the 1970s. And were you to include all Black people in it, it would become a race-based and constitutionally weak, open to significant challenge just on its face if race were the leading factor there versus lineage there. Marcel?
So thank you, Denise. What you just read, I'm going to repeat this point. I'm going to double, triple, quadruple down on it. Reparations is not more of Black Americans come out and save democracy, save America. Reparations is us finally saving ourselves. Something we should have done a long time ago, and we've really been trying to do. It's exclusive to us because the debt is over us. Now, I want to say something, though, real quick, Michael. You said that slavery will be weak grounds because it was constitutional. That is not true. That is a big myth. It was something I even believed once. Probably I never even questioned whether it was constitutional. So I can't even say I believed it. I just never questioned it. Slavery actually was never federally constitutionalized ever. That is the reason why our state, you and I are both South Carolinians here. We know South Carolina is the birthplace of the Confederacy. That is why when South Carolina seceded, what was the first thing the Confederates did? They wrote their own constitution. And why did they write their own constitution? Because they felt the Constitution of the U.S. was going to be used against them by who? Abraham Lincoln, who was a constitutional lawyer. And why were they afraid of Abraham Lincoln? Because he was of the constitutional lawyers who realized that the Constitution was actually to be used to prove that slavery should not be allowed in the United States of America. So what did they include in the Constitution of the Confederacy? They explicitly put in there words that you do not find in the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution doesn't say a thing about race. It doesn't say slavery. It doesn't say Negro. It doesn't say slave trade. It says nothing like that at all. The Confederacy put in their constitution Negro slavery, slave trade. They made it specific. So the Constitution, this argument that slavery was constitutional is a lie. Another thing, saying that they weren't citizens, that's the Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision, people have this attitude the Supreme Court cannot be wrong. Yet, there are several ways, and even now, I think last week, an article came out. Supreme Courts can be what they call out of good practice. Out of good practice, meaning that they cite precedent or they ignore precedent. The Dred Scott decision was a wrong decision. Here's how it was. That's the finding. They said that a Negro is not a citizen, but they contradicted themselves already. How? Because if a Negro was not a citizen, then how in the hell was a Negro able to take his case to the Supreme Court? How in the hell was a Negro who's not a citizen able to go through several courts and get to the Supreme Court? A person who's not a citizen cannot do that. The fact that Dred Scott was able to even petition the courts as a citizen shows he was a regular citizen. The fact that slavery did not even exist in a lot of the states at that time shows that it was never constitutional. The fact that northern states ignored the Fugitive Slave Act, saying that slavery cannot be forced upon them because it was not something that the federal government enshrined, shows that this argument of slavery being constitutional is not something that all legal scholars agree. And the truth be told, the evidence shows that it was not. And again, Michael, let's say even if slavery was constitutional, let me humor you some because I hear people say that the Japanese internment was legal. That was actually a law. You can literally take a Japanese person and put him in concentration camps. That was a law. And yet the Japanese got reparations for something that when it happened was legal to be done. So even if slavery was constitutional and legal at the time, that still does not take away from our reparations claim because the Japanese internment was legal. Technically, Hitler put in the Jews in concentration camps. He was in control of Germany at the time. That could be argued to have been legal. But the fact of the matter is, even if slavery was constitutional, which it was not, that will not take away from our reparations claim. And that will still be the place where our debt starts. It starts with chattel slavery. So if your ancestor wasn't up in there when chattel slavery was happening, you're not going to just get off a plane and say, hey, give me my check because I'm black. Because if you can't tell a Jewish person who survived the Holocaust that a Jewish person from Ethiopia, for example, moves to Israel, and you can't say to that Jewish person anti-Semitism is a big problem, so give all Jewish people a check. No one would dare say that to Holocaust survivors. Ain't no one gonna say that to us who've been surviving the American Holocaust and still fighting its legacy.
Michael, do you have a rebuttal to that? And then we'll move forward with additional questions.
Yeah. First, I want to say that, first of all, slavery is in the Constitution. The Constitution includes an end date for the slave trade. And, most constitutional decisions and Supreme Court decisions are based on implications in the Constitution, right? So, and then, this is an arcane point, but there is a difference between legal and constitutional. Segregation was legal, and because anybody could pass a law, we could pass, a legislature could get together and say, we're going to pass a law now that, only white people can have water. right? And that is exactly what the Supreme Court is for, because if they pass that law, only white people getting water will be legal, and the Supreme Court would have to deem it unconstitutional, right? So the Constitution includes slavery. It has an implication of slavery. The fugitive slave law went to the Supreme Court many times and was upheld. There are numerous freedom cases that appeared in the Supreme Court where people were, for instance, Penny Lane was in the Missouri Territory and taken, where slavery wasn't legal, and she petitioned the court then. And the implication from that is that if you are in the boundaries of the United States, slavery is constitutional. So the idea that slavery is in the Constitution is a myth, right? The words might not be in there, just like the words, like you got the right to have a gun ain't in there, but we infer what arms mean, right? That's the basis of many constitutional arguments on both sides, right? But the larger point of this, and again, I don't know why. It might be a point that it's like your bullet point or whatever. But the idea that you could just get off a plane and get reparations because you're Black is not a position that any person really holds. I don't know why you're arguing that. But I do think
Okay, Michael, hold on.
let me finish. That the larger point of it is that if we decide, like, I am for reparations regardless, but if we decide to limit reparations to freedmen and exclude people who are the descendants of people who suffered from the effects of slavery, like, I'm not arguing that it is about discrimination or racism or white supremacy. I'm talking about people who came to this country, whether you're talking about the people who came from the Louisiana territories, the hundreds of thousands of people of color and free people of color and the Black people who came to the Louisiana territories and were not enslaved and were never descendants of slaves and suffered the same discrimination. I'm talking about the people who came to this country after emancipation. And I'm not talking about everybody Black, but I'm talking about the people who suffered from the vestiges of slavery are not limited to freedmen, although I do agree with you that there is and should be a special consideration for the descendants of slaves. There is no question, disproportionately from the vestiges of slavery and from slavery, right? But if you are going to even include the bill makes the point, right? Because when it talks about the vestiges of slavery, if you read the bill, notice when it talks about the vestiges of slavery, it just switches all of a sudden from descendants of enslaved to African Americans, because it is a fact that all of those discriminatory laws, all of those constitutionally upheld discriminatory laws, all of the segregation, all of the Jim Crow, all of the things that the American military did to veterans, all of that affected more people than just there is no doubt about that, than just the descendants of slaves. There is no doubt about it. So if you want to make the argument